can you verify that the meeting has been properly posted?
Yes, it has.
Okay, we now move into the portion of our meeting where there's an opportunity for public comment. Do we have any volunteers to speak?
We have none.
Okay. All right, so then we're moving into our first action item for this evening, which is the approval of the minutes from last year's meeting, I should say. Mr. Wad?
Yeah, I think there is a typo under members present, and below that it says board members present again. I believe that should say board members absent. I believe that Ms. Voigt was not present. Is that correct?
I believe she was.
She's not listed as having voted.
No, she was.
She was-
not on the committee, so she was
Correct.
just listed as being here.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, sorry, wrong committee. Never mind.
Okay.
I didn't realize that we tracked that, so I thought this was an indication of a board member absent, but correct. Thank you, sorry.
I'd be looking for a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Passes 5-0. Our next action item is the approval of the vouchers. Did we receive any questions this month?
Just one that I've already answered.
Thank you. All right, so I'd be looking for a motion to approve.
I move.
Second.
Thank you. All right, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Can I just clarify who the motion was? Because I heard two.
So it was motioned by Mr. Wad and seconded by Mr. Borowski.
Actually, I think someone else seconded. it.
I said it out loud. I don't know if I talked over someone or not, but I did mean the second.
Second. I have-
Yeah, me and Mr. Wad were real close to.
Okay, so it was motioned by Mr. Wad, seconded by Mr. Zenobia.
No, that's right.
Yes.
Okay? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. Passes 5-0. We are now moving into the discussion or information items for this evening, and the first discussion item is the monthly budget report.
So this evening, I just want to bring your attention to the tax levy paperwork. It now includes the levy amounts by municipality on it for this month, and of course, our first payment will be next in January here, so you'll see those payments next month when I present. The salaries and benefits, I did take a look at those. They are on pace with last year's same time frame, so we are moving along in the year as we expect. And the 25-26 budgets are going out to some of the sites this week, just so that you know. Are there any questions that I can answer?
I actually do. When we talk about what is going out to the sites, can you just expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So every year, based on the enrollment at the site, they are given an allocation that is the responsibility of the principals, and that is going out to them in the next couple weeks. It'll go out.
So we send that out at this time every year, and it's based on a per pupil allocation. So high school gets X amount, middle school, elementary, et cetera. And what we do, even though we're still in the budget balancing process, changes might come, we give it to them now to at least start the process, but what they have, saying, hey, this is so you can start your conversations. This is not a promise that this will be your allocation come fall. But principals want to know, they want to start planning, so we share that information with them.
No, that's great. And the reason that I ask is obviously as much attention as we are paying into our operating budget and how that changes with all of the reduced enrollment and all the other things that we're looking at, is that we should be asking our principals to also take ways to look at where there's excess that we can save as a district.
Excellent.
Any other questions? Seeing none. Our next discussion item is the long-range budget forecast.
Yeah, every year in January or February, we bring back the results of our budget forecast. We use the Baird model to accomplish that. And it's to allow us to start, kind of what we touched on now, what are we doing with allocations, what are we doing with staffing, what's enrollment looking like? But also it provides a multi-year forecast, and like any forecast, the further out you go, the numbers get harder to project. One challenge we have this year is it's the last year of a biennial budget, so we're guessing what that next budget will look like, but we usually use existing legislation for that. So for revenue limit, for example, for revenue limit purposes, we are using the $325 increase that's supposed to be in place for 399 more years. We'll see. None of us will be here to know if that comes to fruition or not, hopefully, but it's things like that that we use. Open enrollment, a lot of them we assume just flat, but we try to gather as much good data as we can because come May 1st, teacher contracts are issued. And come May, June, staff compensation's locked in and things. So a lot of the budget's getting locked in as we go, so we need to get a jump on things. And like last month, we had it where you approved the assumptions that were to go into it. I have those assumptions as one of the attachments. There's a couple tweaks to it that we've made, and we will continue to tweak that as we roll forward into the more detailed planning later this year. But again, the big topics will be coming to the board. In March, we'll be looking at how our health insurance is looking. Obviously, teacher and staff pay is in the spring, early summer. So all these building blocks are being put into place. In terms of the forecast itself, there's nothing new. I think the biggest challenge that STW continues to face, along with over half the districts in the state of Wisconsin, is declining enrollment. We're all searching for kids. All college and universities are searching for kids, or young adults in that case. So we do a lot to gather that data and to use it. So we're assuming a loss of resident enrollment for the third Friday count of 2%. It's kind of been the average. That's what the projections from the third-party firm we use is kind of at as well. So that's been built in. So it continues to be a struggle. We continue to have to right-size every year. But I did put in the executive summary that we do have some bright spots in our financial outlook that a lot of other districts maybe don't have. We have a very strong fund balance that I think this board uses very strategically to tackle one-time expenditures. We used ESSER very effectively in terms of not creating a fiscal cliff. I think we should acknowledge that. And we also have these conversations like tonight where we're looking out 1 or 2, 3 years out to see where we're heading, because we're a big district. We've been steadily declining for a decade now. And there's big decisions and things that need to be made that oftentimes take a lot of time to come to fruition. So a lot of these presentations, and I've probably given a fair dozen or two of them in my career, are all doom and gloom, and I don't think it's quite that. So I think let's celebrate the things we can. And then the things we can't control, like resident enrollment necessarily, we'll tackle those as we go. So a lot of attachments. The Baird model has a lot of tutorial type stuff tied to it, so I attached a lot of things that I thought you might find interesting. But this conversation is really going to be a lot to do with revenue limit authority, enrollment, expenditures. Again, we made some assumptions. CPI will be coming out shortly for the teaching staff, and maybe even out as I speak. But we'll kind of draw all this together, and then I can answer any questions you might have. So the first attachment was the preliminary budget assumptions, and I put the revisions in a separate column, but again, a lot of these are holding true, and I don't see any reasons to adjust them. Health insurance, we think, is coming in a little better than certainly last year's claims were. So I've moved that target not only because of a need to realize some savings, but we're hoping to have no premium increase for 25-26. Normally, our assumption is a 5% increase, and if it's over that, we do plan design changes to get to 5%, but that's just a target so we can do this calculation. This isn't etching it in stone, and this is how we're going to proceed forward. But everything else is pretty steady. Dental insurance, not as big a line item. We don't see any change there. Our reserves continue to be strong in our self-funding program there. We have a student transportation contract for a change. The good news is we know the number. Bad news is the number isn't as low as we probably would like it to be, but that's where we're at. parental choice program, again, that's really a levy issue because that additional revenue, and we'll talk about that again in a few minutes, is matched up with an exact same expenditure, but it's a levy issue. So I put it in there because it's becoming a very significant number. And right now, we really don't do a tax levy projection because that means you're guessing what state aid's going to be, and that's a very difficult number to strive for. But the only note I put on there is keep in mind as we talk about levy, we've built in a cushion for the 25-26 fiscal year. Our Fund 39 levy will drop by roughly $5 million. So if everything else remained the same and aid went down $5 million, we'd have a flat levy into the next fiscal year. But hopefully we come out better, we have a levy decrease, a matching rate decrease, and everything works out as we all hope. So those are the assumptions. Again, the bulk of it was all discussed last month, and we all kind of nodded that, this is a good starting point for doing this larger calculation. Any questions on the assumptions at all? The next, I'm going in the order I put the attachments, so let me project. Here we go. So again, this is kind of some of the canned graphs that the Baird model has, and this is our resident enrollment over being projected out. And again, that's that 2% decrease that we've been talking about. But then we also get an increase usually in the amount we get to levy per resident person. So you have these two things working, they're inverse of each other. And what's happening from that is we're kind of getting a semi-flat level of revenue limit growth moving forward. Now, a couple years ago, we had $11,000 per pupil, a bump up to that. That was a more significant jump, but that was also one time in 30 years that's kind of jumps even occurred. So these are just one of the graphs that I added just so I thought you'd find it interesting. And then I have a couple displays that they do that show you how we go about calculating the revenue limit, how we calculate the tax levy, and then how we get to the rate. I won't walk you through those, but I thought they were pretty helpful documents. I'm more than willing to answer any questions you might have related to them. But I thought the most important thing is it starts with membership, resident membership. That's the driver. And people always say, why do you talk about enrollment all the time? This is school finance, is that third Friday count. That's the core data point that we work from. So again, I thought it was a really helpful, well laid out document, so I thought we'd just have it here for you to review. The next one is kind of a Q&A document that I thought was pretty interesting, and mainly I put it in here because of the first question, and it goes back to, Darren, why do all you do is talk about enrollment? The revenue limit revenue limit and per pupil aid represent 85% of our operational levy, or budget. So this is the driver. The other 15% doesn't tend to move much. So it really comes back to the count and the amount we get per pupil. So again, for your review, I thought it was a helpful document, and hopefully you think so as well. So with that said, building in the 2% drop in resident enrollment on the third Friday count, and the $325 per pupil, I think there's a fair chance that number holds. Not because maybe it was such a brilliant number to put in that place, but I think it's a pretty solid number to have in there. Putting those two factors, this shows you what last couple of years of revenue limit, or this year and last year, a little history on revenue limit calculation, and then it projects out based on those assumptions. And you can see this year we have a $136 million revenue limit, and by 2030 we'll have $140 million. But there's really not a significant level of growth there on a percentage basis. If you look at, well, geez, Darren, you're going to get $1.2 million more in 25-26. That's less than a 2% growth in revenue. Think of our bus contract. Think about staff. Think about health insurance. You can eat up $1.2 million in our budget pretty rapidly. So So that's what it's projecting out, and I think it's a fair projection based on current legislation. And I don't think the funding formulas are changing anytime soon. And people like to say they don't like them, but both parties have had full control in Madison, and neither one of them have touched the funding formulas. So I think that's the truest measure of their disdain towards it. So then it leads you to this document, and this is the output. So this year, the 24-25 school year, we have a negative budget, but we normally do, and that's primarily due to site carryover and some other accounting things that we're required to do. So that's kind of baked in, but I net that out when I project out into the future years, but they display it here. So for the 25-26 school year, I'm projecting a $2.7 million deficit. And then people grab onto these numbers, and I understand it, but these numbers assume we do nothing to balance our budget on a yearly basis. This is just rolling the status quo forward year after year after year, which won't be the case. So if you kind of net those numbers out and you just do the math in your head, you're looking at like we've faced in the past, a $3 to $4 million deficit going forward based on the assumptions that we started with. And that's where all the other conversations we'll have down through spring, early summer. I'll be factoring and keying in actuals as we go, but, so I think this is why we present this in January ahead of all those other conversations. But what I would consider, there's a structural deficit when your expenditures are growing at less than 2% and your expenditures are in that 3 to 4% range historically. So if we do nothing, again, I'm not promoting that, and I'm not worried about that being the case. You can see in the line below the red row of numbers, fund balance is slowly being spent down. And again, this is a great model. It's a great tool for me, but I don't like this output because it makes it look like it's a new $7 million deficit, and then it's a new $11 million deficit, and that's not the case. At the bottom, we've talked a lot about this as well. This is a tax levy issue. This doesn't help balance our operational budget, but you can see the referendum debt fall off. It's $7.9 million, the levy in 24-25, and then we drop below $3 million in 25-26, and then our debt will be paid off. So on a tax levy view, I think we're in a very good position. If tax levy was the only thing we were worried about, with limited revenue limit growth and that Fund 39 levy falling off, our tax scenario would look very good. But you don't balance your budget on that necessarily. You need some revenue growth as well. So any questions on the projection or thoughts on the assumptions or anything that I can touch on now, or otherwise I'll just finish up with a couple more documents.
I think the only comment that I have just goes back to the same conversation that historically we would sit at this point, you get through the end of this, the deficit is cleared through the general fund and we move on. And I think that the conversation is changing, that the operational costs need to be scoped and looked at differently, which is why I said we need to ask our principals to take a different look at what we're doing. We can't continue to spend at the same rate when we're not supporting the same amount of students, and just helping people understand that that is a reality of where we're going. We just have to have the conversations.
And we are. Administratively, we started working on the budget balancing plan right before the holiday break, and we'll continue until, leading up to the teacher contracts being released. The other attachment is our budget building calendar. We're right where we should be, January of 2025, looking at the long-range budget forecast. So, and this is just a rough guide, but it has the key dates in there. You can see May's in there, us checking in periodically, and then we transition to prepping for the budget hearing in September, and then final approval come late October. So, seems like we just did that, but we're back at it. And then lastly, I put at your desk, I was playing around with numbers and today, and I just thought you'd find this interesting, maybe not, but this is the revenue limit calculation, just in a different format. But David Watt had asked me a while back, what's the rate of growth with the choice programs? And that's why I went into this website and started downloading this information, was to identify that information. So that's all the green information. Again, what I want you to take from this is if someone looked at our revenue limit and said, well, Darren, in 22-23, you had a $126 million revenue limit, and now you have a $136 million revenue limit. What are you doing with that $10 million but then if you net out those choice programs, because they come with a matching expenditure, we are simply doing accounting work for the government at that point. The top line of the blue numbers at the bottom is what I consider the net revenue limit. This is what we have to operate our schools, to buy our supplies, pay our utilities. And we're truly at $129 million, which is less than what our revenue limit was in 2015-16. So I thought that was an important number to show and to demonstrate. And you can see for years, the revenue limit, now you have COVID in there, which makes those years' data kind of tainted usually. We had little or no growth, even a steady, slight decline. But then in 23-24, the funding bump came with the $11,000 per pupil. I've said for a long time that $11,000 funded inflation, and we're no different than we were prior to the inflation. And if you look at the busing contract and the cost of hiring good staff and all of that, a lot of that was just because I really thought at the time we're going to have two really solid years at least. And then in 24-25, we do have growth because that $325 increase per pupil's been put in. But you're looking at a growth rate of your revenue limit of less than 2%. So I just thought you'd find it funny or interesting. And then the bottom line is the actual percent growth in those choice programs over those years. And again, two variables involved there, the number of kids in those choice programs and then the dollar amount per pupil that the state is allocating to fund them. So like in 23-24, you can see there's a big percentage. I think most of that was a funding increase, not so much students, but that's just me guessing as of now. So I just thought maybe you'd find this interesting, and I tried putting it on a small piece of paper, but you could hardly read the numbers. So that's where we are. The projection's very similar to what we've seen. So,
I think this is great.
oh, good. I got the accountant on my side, right?
Sarah? Any questions?
You just like looking at all the numbers. It's not
I like
in the numbers.
I like the
That's great.
trends. I like it's interesting what the story it starts to narrate and kind of debunks certain things that you hear in the media and how things are going based on what funding actually is and how it's using. So I obviously will spend more time looking through all of this, but I like the story it tells
And the
most of the time.
The revenue limit there's a lot of data in there. You just have to be able to pull it out. And then if you add it to multi-year trending, you can really see a lot of what I consider interesting, but I'm an oddity probably in that regard, so.
Mr. Wad?
Yeah, real quick, Mr. Clark, I feel like I've been hearing noise around challenges to the 400-year year-over-year increase in revenue limit authority. Are you aware of any court challenges to that and whether or not it's pending before the Supreme Court? I was trying to do some research on it earlier today and I couldn't find anything, but I know I've heard.
There's cases out there. I can't say I know whether it's up to the Supreme Court level or not yet.
Okay.
I don't think it is, but
But that aside, every new biennial budget cycle provides the opportunity for that to be undone and changed. New law can take effect with each biennial budget. New law could be introduced that says,
we'll go back to doing it every biennial instead of building in an increase. Is that true?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
Dr. Piasek?
Thank you. I also appreciate all the background information, Darren. Maybe in response to what Mr. Wad had asked, and I've been saying this from the beginning, like, it's interesting, this 400-year thing, but it won't take, well, it's already being said that it's not enough by certain individuals very high up in state government. So it really is a small thing compared to the relative amount of state aid that was unpredictable for us in this past budget cycle. So I look at that very unpredictable line in the budget, and all of this is very interesting, and I know you and your team spend a lot of time trying to figure out what assumptions are behind every one of these cells, but we won't get those final answers until we're well underway in our school year next year. And so we'll pull whatever levers we can with some of the discretionary debt that we have, or accumulation that we have. But that's the piece for me that is just so difficult for us to plan around. And that is not, it's out of our control, obviously. And I agree with Mrs. Kozlowski in that there are things that we should be doing operationally to try to contain, but I don't necessarily think that should be happening at the student level, right? So once the budgets are deployed to the individual schools, we've made those decisions based on the budgets that we've finalized, essentially. We know what our state aid payment is. We know what our levy is. So I think it's kind of going forward, what's the overall operational picture looking like? Because trying to impact what's happening at the school level after it's been deployed is just too late, and it's, in my opinion, I guess it's the wrong place. So I think we have to look at
Yeah.
all those other things, and I know you do this, right? There's this whole span of things that we think could happen, but even this past year, we made our best guess to say we think it's going to be flat, but we're going to put it at 1% because we don't know any better, and then it ends up being down almost 3%, which is great. But it's a lot of work to try to anticipate something that we won't even know until we're already spending in that school year.
Yeah, that's why I don't even try to get a levy out there. This early would just be, even in a year where you're in the first year of a state biennial budget, even before MPS and all these other variables that have been added to that conversation, I hold off as long as I can. I have to bring something forward to the budget hearing. I mean, that's the true timeline. In terms of the schools and that message and getting those work papers out, as we go through, and I always have that preface, hey, it could change, da-da-da-da. They're always the last one to be changed. So, because they're underway, a lot of them have pre-spent money because they're leading into the school year, right? So we're sitting here in October having this conversation. Well, the train's kind of left. So we always try to protect the schools as much as we can. And really the only impact and reduction the schools are seeing is it's based on a student allocation. They have fewer students every year on average. So I just want you to know we do protect the schools pretty closely. And I don't know in my 10 years here if we've ever actually gone in beyond the enrollment impact of that calculation, gone in and taken a single dollar from a school. But all the staffing costs are built in at that point. So your options in October are very narrow.
So my final thought is I think we've done some good work over the last couple years to try to close that structural deficit piece. But that's been there for a long time, and it's the result of declining enrollment and kind of that snowballing effect, if you will, of the hold harmless and that kind of running out, and then, it just continues. And while the birth rate may appear to be leveling off a little bit, it's not going to.
They won't be here for 6 years.
Right, it's not going to stop. So I feel like our effort really needs to be focused on how we manage that structural deficit, because that seems to be the only thing that's predictably within our control.
I can tell you, I've given basically the same budget forecast for 10 straight years. And 10 years before that in McGuanago. Somehow the birth rate follows me. I don't know. I haven't had an upward trend in enrollment in, I don't think, 20-some years, so. But yeah, it is truly a factor of resident enrollment. That's why all these districts are trying so hard to recruit and offer more virtual schools and do things to bring kids in.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing none. Moving into other business, are there any recommendations for future committee meetings? Okay, seeing none. We do have a need to adjourn to executive session. If someone wants to read the motion in.
I'll move to adjourn to executive session pursuant to Wisconsin statute 19.85, sub 1, sub E, for deliberating or negotiating the purchasing of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session. Additionally, to adjourn to executive session pursuant to Wisconsin statute 19.15, sub 1, sub E, for deliberating the purchasing. I'm reading the same. I'm sorry, I thought there was a second item.
You're good?
That concludes my motion.
Second.
I'll second it, the first part of his motion.
Tanya, can you roll call us in, please? You're out.
Mr. Browski,
Aye.
Dr. Piasek,
Aye.
Mr. Wad,
Aye.
Mr. Zenobia,
Aye.
Mrs. Kozowski.
Aye. Passes 5-0. We are in closed session.